Will the Committee of Supply please come to order? This section of the Committee of Supply will now resume consideration of the estimates for the Department of Environment, Climate, and Parks. Questioning for this department will continue in a global manner. The floor is now open for questions. The member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a follow-up to yesterday's question about the wetlands, I wondered if the minister could tell us if any wetlands have been lost over the last year and how much.
The Honorable Minister for Environment, Climate, and Parks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and certainly appreciate the patience of the table today and the member from Wolseley. We take, obviously, our government takes wetland preservation very seriously, so we want to ensure that we're able to put on the record the actions that this government has taken and will continue to take when it comes to sustainable wetlands. Going back to 2018, our government introduced the Sustainable Watersheds Act, which essentially will allow no net loss of wetlands benefits. So again, we're enshrining in legislation no net loss of wetlands. Class 4 and 5 can't be drained as well. Class 3, if there is an issue with a Class 3, it would have to be, or drained, it would have to be set back to a 2-1 ratio. So essentially then we'd put 2 back for 1 that would be lost. Also too as well, the member would know back in 2017, or if not, certainly you'll know now, that in 2017 the Grow Trust as well was introduced to the tune of $204 million. And again, that's a Sustainable Grow Trust, and we talked about trusts last week and how they work, and this is another example on how our government's investment will continue to protect our wetlands as we go forward. 2021, we also talked about watershed districts too as well, and added and conserved over 990 hectares of Class 1 and Class 2 wetlands. So great work, great news on wetlands, and looking forward to your next question.
The member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to have it clearly on the record, the minister, I just want to confirm that you're saying that since the Sustainable Watershed Act of 2018, there in fact has been no net loss of wetlands, and have there been any net gain of wetlands in Manitoba since that time?
The Honorable Minister for Environment, Climate, and Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the member from Wolseley for the question. As we continue to gather some further information, I will put on the record and provide some further positive news when it comes to our watershed districts, which again play a vital role in enhancing, our watershed and our areas that we're trying to protect. Back on June 10th of this year, our government put out a news release essentially saying that the Manitoba government will invest over $3 million in important work in Manitoba's watershed districts, essentially, again, expanding on that. And I wanted to just read into the record, if I may, some of the partnerships that we have and some that are actually new this year and this fiscal. And some of the watershed districts that we're speaking to currently are partnered with us are Alonza, the RM of Arborg, the RM of Argyle, RM of Armstrong, RM of Bifrost Riverton, the RM of Boissevain Morton, City of Brandon, the RM of Brenda Wascata, the RM of Brokenhead, Town of Carberry, Town of Carman, RM of Cartier, RM of Roblin Cartier, RM of Coldwell, RM of Cornwallis, City of Dauphin, and the RM of Dauphin, and certainly more to add into the record, but I'll pass it back over to the member from Wolseley to refresh her last question so I can get some more details on the record for her.
The member for Wolseley.
For the record, I don't feel that there's been a clear response about net gain of wetlands in Manitoba in terms of what results have been achieved and how much net gain there's been. I know I asked that question when we met yesterday and again today, but since that clarity isn't coming, I'm going to move on to ask about something that's referenced in the annual report on page 13. It says that Manitoba implemented over 115 government-wide initiatives to reduce emissions and become more resilient to climate change. And that these were, was making significant progress on the climate and green plans. So could the minister tell me, I don't need a list of 115 because there's other questions to be asked, but if the minister could name at least some of these initiatives, perhaps the most substantial ones, how much they cost, what was the actual GHG reduction amount from these initiatives, and perhaps the cost per ton of those GHG reductions.
The Honorable Minister for Environment, Climate, and Parks.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So to be clear then, the member from Wolseley is putting on the record that watershed districts are not an important program for the NDP. So I just want to make sure that that gets on the record. Water is water is water, Mr. Chair. We know that, and watershed districts play a vital role as we move forward. So I just want to make sure that that is on the record, that the member doesn't care about over 100 watershed districts and growing throughout this great province. I'll also take the opportunity to answer the question. As I said in my preamble before, I said that I would gather some information to ensure that the member from Wolseley had accurate information, and I'm prepared to put that on the record now. While individual wetlands may be altered, compensation and other protections ensure that benefits stay on the landscape, helping landowners and producers to farm the best and conserve the rest, and the best stewards of our land. Last year, 1,700.82 acres of Class 3 wetlands were altered. More than $200,000 in compensation is paid to enhance and conserve wetlands on the landscape. Win-win, Mr. Chair, and certainly a responsible choice as we go forward to protect our wetlands.
The member for Wolseley.
I just want to remind the minister that Manitobans do deserve answers to these questions and help understanding the budget. And it took 2 different days and me asking the question multiple times, but thank you for giving me the answer that I initially asked for yesterday. because in fact, we are quite committed to wetlands and their protection, as well as very interested in the work of watershed district boards. So I'm going to come back to the question I asked. Maybe you've had some time now to gather some information, but if the minister could name some of the so-called 115 government-wide initiatives to reduce emissions that were supposedly undertaken in Manitoba just last year. We're all very interested in hearing about some of these projects, how much they cost, and to what degree did they reduce GHG emissions?
The Honorable Minister for Environment, Climate, and Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I have areas here that the member was questioning on, so I'm certainly pleased to put on the record that we have increased ethanol content in gasoline from 8.5% to 10%, and biodiesel from 2.5 to 5%. The efficiency trucking program will save 25 million liters of fuel and reduce GHG emissions over the life cycle of the equipment. Manitoba Hydro's last coal-fired generating unit was shut down, and natural gas units in Selkirk were phased out ahead of schedule in 2021. These actions, again, have reduced GHG emissions by approximately 56,000 tons. Despite the challenges from the pandemic, and we know that it was 2 years of a challenge for all of us, Efficiency Manitoba was able to effectively achieve a 69% of their planned net electric savings and 60% planned net natural gas savings as well, also contributing to net GHG reduction. And also the Manitoba Conservation and Climate Fund that currently is sitting at 1.5 million, started out in 2020 at 600K, also is helping to reduce emissions and advance the uptake of clean technologies and practices in Manitoba as we move forward collectively to ensure we continue to reduce our GHG footprint here in Manitoba.
The member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the minister referenced the Conservation and Climate Fund, which we know was launched in 2020. And my understanding is, so based on the budget, $1 million was allocated last year for 9 projects, which covered innovation and clean tech, conservation, water quality, circular economy development, and sector emissions reductions. $1 million is a fairly insignificant amount of money for, you know, these large, supposedly large projects. Can the minister say how much money all those applicants actually have requested over the past 3 years since this fund was launched?
The Honorable Minister for Environment, Climate, and Parks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I'll just start. There's a lot of information here to provide the member and the table today. So I'm going to start back with, again, in 2021, with the Conservation and Climate Fund. When we started that fund, again, it was just under 600K. And next fiscal in 21-22, just under 1 million, and 22-23, now the Conservation and Climate Fund will be sitting at 1.5 million, as I mentioned earlier on in a response. Second to that, too, as well, we have to remember that this is a multi-prong approach our government is taking, and again, we have a plan, and we know that the members opposite and the NDP don't have a plan, never had a plan. So we'll continue on with our plan for Manitobans. And number two is, again, the Climate and Green Fund, which again is to the tune of $6.37 million. And also the Waste Reduction and Recycling Support, again, another $8.7 million. And I asked the member to stay tuned for some more exciting news from that fund itself, again, going towards GHG benefits. And also the Low Carbon Economy Fund, LCEF, as it's known, to the tune of $66.8 million. So, you know, we're totaling over $80 million in investments to help reduce greenhouse gases. I think it's a wonderful start. I know in 6.5 years, we've moved the needle a lot compared to the former government, who quite frankly doesn't have a needle to move forward. So we're proud of our investments. We'll continue to make investments to ensure we reduce our greenhouse gas footprint.
The member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if the minister recalls, because I understand he was not the minister at the time, but when the Conservation Climate Fund was launched, the new criteria for projects to apply for this funding really pushed a lot of environment groups out of the way. And I asked many times about this in QP for many of our environmental NGOs and other organizations who have really been leading the way in Manitoba for many years, who suddenly didn't fit the criteria to apply for these new projects. But that aside, $1 million last year and $1.5 million this year actually isn't very much money. So I'm going to repeat my original question, which was, how much money have all applicants requested and applied for over the 3 years? Just so we can get a sense, you know, have you given out like 1%, 10% of what environmental groups have been looking for their projects?
The Honorable Minister for Environment, Climate, and Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you repeat the last part of that question, please?
The member for Wolseley.
All applicants that have applied through the Conservation and Climate Fund, I'm looking for a total of what they've applied for. If we added it all out, have they looked for $10 million and 1 million was spent? How many people didn't get that money?
The Honorable Minister for Environment, Climate, and Parks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and we all know, everybody sitting around the table know, the need for funding support has never been greater. We know that. We've seen that, particularly the outcomes of COVID and the challenges that not only Manitobans are having, but the world is having. So we also know that many programs throughout government, doesn't matter what stripe of government, are typically oversubscribed. Well, I can tell the member that this particular fund has the same. Conservation and Climate Fund is oversubscribed. However, as I did mention before, the fund continues to adapt. We continue to adapt to the needs as we go forward, and we will continue to grow that fund as the need continues to grow as well. The member may or may not be aware, but we did a similar process with in municipal relations. When I was a minister there, we essentially moved to an online application process that streamlined the process for Manitoban NGOs and rolled in a number of outdated legacy programs that, quite frankly, were cumbersome for applicants to navigate and simply get put in an application. So we moved forward with the Building Sustainable Community Funds grant process through that single application process. We do the same in conservation with the Conservation and Climate Fund. It's a fund that now also has the support of staff, much like we had in municipal relations, where staff are there to support applicants and NGOs to ensure the application is done appropriately so that nobody is left behind. So we'll continue to as we have from fiscal 2021 to fiscal 22-23, grow the CCF fund as we go forward. As the need is growing, so will the government's commitment to NGOs.
The member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in other words, if I want to know how much money all applicants have requested through the Conservation Climate Fund, we'll have to FIP it to find that out. The next question pertains to the environmental compliance and enforcement. I see on page 53 of the annual report that there are 55 FTEs in that department, and that there was a number of environmental compliance actions taken. But it's very confusing when you look at the environmental legislation enforcement summary for that year. From what I can tell, there were no warnings and no prosecutions for contaminated sites remediation, no warnings or prosecutions for the Dangerous Goods Handling and Transportation Act, no warnings or prosecutions for the Dangerous Goods Handling and Transportation Regulation, no warnings or prosecutions for the Hazardous Waste Regulation, and a small amount of warnings for environmental accident reporting, for the Environment Act, for pesticides regulation and litter regulation, but no prosecutions, only a $2,540 fine. Well, actually, sorry, I'm probably reading that wrong, but minor amount of fines with after 11 warnings and only 2 prosecutions for storage and handling of petroleum products. So it seems like in 2021, 2022, I don't know if magically all Manitobans stopped breaking environment legislation, but I kind of doubt that's what happened. So can the minister explain why almost no enforcement took place of all of these regulations and acts over a year?
The Honorable Minister of Environment, Climate and Parks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly I first off want to start off by thanking the department, particularly the Environmental Enforcement Department, led by our staff and their team, which are doing a wonderful job at ensuring that Manitobans are, number one, of course, they're being educated while the 55 FTEs are in the field, and again, ensuring that compliance is being upheld as they continue to go door to door, as they have been, even during COVID, where challenges were obviously faced. The department continued to go and ensure that Manitobans were being compliant, and further education. So to the question from the member from Wolseley, it's quite clear to us here on page 53 that the department's work in educating and ensuring enforcement and compliance is in place is working. And I think this is a good news story, and I think the member would agree with me. If these numbers were off the charts, then I think we would recognize that there'd be a challenge. But I think it bodes well for what the department has been doing. I know the members opposite have an issue, particularly with the way departments are being run, and that's shameful. But I can tell you that I stand behind the department for what they're doing. They're educating Manitobans, and that is the direct result of these numbers being where they're at.
The member for Wolseley.
Thank you for that answer. And in particular, I'm interested in the fact that there were no prosecutions or warning around pesticide regulation when both the minister and I heard very clearly on committee the other night that any number of companies have been lying and using illegal pesticides for lawn care. That was reported by one of the speakers that the minister had invited to be here to support his bill. So it's just shocking to me that no warnings or prosecutions have been used to address what we heard was a clear problem in Manitoba. But I'm going to ask a little bit now on a different topic. Back in 2020, there was a lot of fanfare about the Youth Advisory Council. There was, an announcement that the government was going to invest in a Youth Advisory Council for the Climate and Green Plan. There was a big announcement when the youth were selected and the work was going to begin. And since that time, almost 3 years, we've heard nothing. So I'd like to know what the results are of that work. What advice has been given, and if the government has implemented any advice from the Youth Advisory Council.
The Honorable Minister for Environment, Climate, and Parks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and certainly appreciate the question, particularly about youth and their involvement in climate change, and particularly the YAC, or also known as YAC. And I can share with the member that when we were up in Yukon this past summer, we had the opportunity to meet with the youth advisory group from Yukon, and was just a wonderful opportunity to not only understand from their perspective of what they feel needs to be done to move forward with the challenges we're having with climate change and in the environment, but actually have some actual solid takeaways to work with YAC here and again our expert advisory council, who YAC report back to as well, and government. So some lessons learned up there, and during the last 2 years of the pandemic, of course, neither organization has been working to the capacity that they should be. We will continue to, and we are continuing to enhance opportunities for our youth to be involved directly with and more actually provide more information and detail to the Expert Advisory Council as we go forward, and based on lessons learned when we were up in the Yukon during our conference on climate up there. So to the member's question, YAC is a very important part of our government. Matter of fact, we started the Expert Advisory Council under this government, and we started the Youth Advisory Council under this government. We'll continue to enhance and grow their mandates, both the EAC and the YAC, to ensure that we're getting a fulsome and essentially a knowledge from all aspects and all generations, which we know is going to be very important for the next generation to lead us as we get into our twilight years of our life. So.
The member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just for clarity on the record, I'd like the minister to confirm that the Youth Advisory Council selected by his government is still active, still meeting regularly to this date, and if he could also share some specific advice that has been given and been implemented by his government.
The Honorable Minister for Environment, Climate, and Parks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly want to read in the record some of the great work that YAC has been doing and where the path forward will lead, and certainly a little bit be repeating some of the first answer, but that's okay. We'll get it on the record for the member. So the YAC mandate included meetings with the EAC as we shared, as they shared views from the youth perspective, as I alluded to earlier, and also assisting EAC on a transportation and water initiatives and advising the EAC on how to communicate and engage with young Manitobans on climate. And that was an area that we were discussing earlier when I was up in Yukon on how lessons learned could be beneficial as we go forward from our youth. The YAC successfully completed this work and drafted a report on communications and engagement. We have new members that were selected to join returning members as well in 21-22 term, again, which officially began in January of 2021. And members were asked to provide their perspectives on Manitoba's green economic recovery, skills and training, and to refine their communications and engagement recommendations from their previous report. And then YAC as well worked on our green economic recovery. Again, was shared at the Green Economic Restart Workshop event held in September of 2021. And in addition, the YAC recommended development of green jobs, contract hub for Manitoba youth, and would help link youth to green employment opportunities. And also the YAC term was extended again to March 31st, 2022, and again to account for COVID, late start due to COVID-19. And the work of the YAC has proven both practical and applicable in ongoing work of the department, including energy strategy and the green transportation strategy, which I alluded to earlier. And I also mentioned that the department is continuing to enhance the structure of the YAC to ensure closer alignment with the Expert Advisory Council. We want to make sure that that lessons learned are applied, and also that there is no silos being developed, because we know how important YAC is and the information they can provide the Expert Advisory Council and our government. So commitments are to be carried forward, including, again, a youth-focused climate survey through Engage Manitoba, which is a great portal, getting information from Manitobans, and also followed by a youth-focused climate change engagement campaign. So lots of great work by YAC, and we're looking forward to continuing to enhance their structure as we go forward. And Mr. Chair, may I? Would it be okay to call for a 2-minute bio break, please?
The minister has requested a leave for just a quick recess for, let's say, 5 minutes. Is that all right with the committee? Agreed and so ordered. Will the Committee of Supply please come to order? The member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask the minister about the endowment funds and the 64 designated improvement projects. And I'd like to ask the minister if he can update us on the progress of those projects, how many have been completed, and which projects have been completed.
The Honorable Minister for Environment, Climate, and Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And in March 2021, the department invested $20 million with the Winnipeg Foundation to establish Manitoba Provincial Parks Endowment Fund to support park improvements and programming. As a matter of fact, the member will recall, I believe it was our first day in estimates, we talked about endowments and how they worked. I think the member now has a better understanding on how that generates sustainable cash flow for endeavors like our parks. Again, this funding is not a reduction of the department. It's actually it's an investment that will continue to provide benefits to parks across the province in perpetuity. The funds are not designated to replace existing base provincial park funding, so it's an enhancement too. Again, the funds include a portfolio of several funds where the Winnipeg Foundation manages and provides oversight over all the funds. Manitoba Parks Endowment portfolio funds are, and I'll put them on the record as follows: Provincial Parks Endowment Fund, Provincial Parks Incentive Fund, Birds Hill Provincial Park Fund, Clearwater Lake Provincial Park Fund, Hecla Grindstone Provincial Park Fund, Hecla Grindstone Provincial Park Fund Cheryl D. Christensen Fund, Paint Lake Provincial Park Fund, Spruce Woods Provincial Park Fund, Upper Fort Garry Heritage Provincial Park Fund, and White Shell Provincial Park Fund. Again, these funds are designed to encourage and receive private donations. Additional donations will grow the fund. We know that there are many Manitobans seeking to make philanthropic contributions and leave a legacy of support for Manitoba provincial parks. We've seen that in the past, and we know it will continue in the future. And since the fund was established, more than $1.6 million in additional funding has been invested in our treasured provincial parks. Annual revenue produced by each fund may be used to support projects that include, but are not limited to, development and maintenance of trails, boardwalks, and associated infrastructure, public use facilities such as amphitheaters, shelters, day use sites, playgrounds, equipment, docks, and launches, park road maintenance, habitat restoration and enhancement, historical assets and cultural sites, infrastructure to support programming, modern machinery and operational equipment, municipal servicing of infrastructure, campground enhancements, and interpretive infrastructure to support programming, maintenance projects to extend and or enhance infrastructure facilities or assets outlined again above are eligible for project costs. And furthermore, some of the other projects directly related to this year as well, some upgrades to the yurts in Camp Morton and Stephenfield, accessible campsites in St. Malo, dock upgrades in Grass River, Centennial Trail improvements in Whiteshell, and one that I'm really proud of are the Moby mats that were installed in Birds Hill this year. We've also installed Moby mats last year in Grand Beach. I can tell you that the Moby mats have made a difference for Manitobans with disabilities, and just a fantastic initiative. And again, I thank the park and their staff, park staff, for their initiative moving forward, particularly with the Moby mats.
The member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to note that this is an enormous amount of public money that has been moved out of government departments and is being overseen by a foundation, and that non-government, non-public servants are making decisions about where this money goes. I noted that in 21-22, the endowment fund generated $863,607, yet only $519,673 was spent. Can the minister explain why?
The Honorable Minister for Environment, Climate, and Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, the member from Wolseley is following the speaking lines of her of the NDP by again throwing foundations under the bus. Simply, they repeat that foundations like St. Boniface Hospital Foundation, Concordia Foundation, they don't seem to have any trust in foundations, which is shameful. And now we're talking about a world-renowned foundation like the Winnipeg Foundation, who every year, year over year, contributes to the health and well-being of all Manitobans through many trusts and endowment funds, and generating revenue for those funds, sustainable revenue, so that Manitobans can enjoy many things, like particularly our provincial parks. So I just want to make sure that that's on the record, Mr. Chair, that the NDP do not support foundations, whether it be Winnipeg Foundation or any other foundation. On that note, we do. Our government does support the Winnipeg Foundation and what they do. We know, and we had this discussion before, that $20 million generated $1.1 million last year. Now the question was $565,000 was spent. That was a partial fiscal year. St. Boniface, or pardon me, the Winnipeg Foundation's fiscal did not align with the government's fiscal, so there was a lapse of approximately half a year. So the numbers that the member alludes to is a partial year of funding, and certainly we know that going forward, once we get better aligned with that foundation and how they roll out, we are looking forward to that fund and that essentially that foundation supporting Manitobans, supporting our parks, and also the question on non-civil servants, but nobody getting involved in the actual decision making. Well, actually, quite frankly, we go to Manitobans. We go to Engage Manitoba. We have and we continue to and will continue to go to Engage Manitoba to ensure Manitobans have a say on where the outcome of that fund will be spent in their provincial parks. And then certainly it comes back to the department, and the Minister's office has the opportunity to go through those recommendations by Manitobans, and we move forward in a sustainable way from the advice of all Manitobans when it comes to investments in our parks. So that, I believe, will answer the member's question. But again, it's shameful that the NDP continue to put on the record that they do not trust foundations in Manitoba.
The member for Wolseley.
The minister is spending a lot of time putting a lot of fiction on the record today, and there is a significant difference between handing over public dollars to a foundation to distribute versus private fundraising by a foundation. But I know the difference. We'll move on. I have one final question about the endowment fund. Are these investments divested from fossil fuels? And was there any communication between the Environment and Climate Department with the Winnipeg Foundation to ensure that these investments were divested from fossil fuels?
The Honorable Minister for Environment, Climate, and Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and we're going to refer, but I will read on the record, though, I'm going to refer the member to go to the Winnipeg Foundation site, website, and check out responsible investment. So I'm just going to read it in the record so that I believe this will certainly answer the member from Wolseley's question and concerns. And how they look at investment. So for many years, investors have included environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, considerations in their analysis. This is to say that some ESG assessment is inherent in traditional investment practices, and today it would be very rare to find a reputable firm not taking these factors into account. Responsible investment, or RI, is more rigorously defined and refers to the integration of ESG research and data analysis with normal financial information to support investment decisions. Each of Winnipeg Foundation's investment managers have a different mandate and stated policy approach to ESG integration. Socially responsible investment is not new, and each of the investment managers will employ is also well aware of how it impacts the companies in which the Winnipeg Foundation invests, and also has 3 pillars below. I welcome the member to check out the Winnipeg Foundation website under investment portfolio.
The member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to give my remaining time for questions to the member from River Heights with the understanding that he will conclude at 6 minutes to 5 to give us enough time to close out today.
The Honorable Member for River Heights.
Yeah, thank you. I know the minister has some interest in addressing the problem with radon contamination or pollution in many homes in Manitoba, and I'm just wondering if the minister can provide an update. And I'm particularly concerned about the situation of people who are on low incomes, who would have difficulty affording a sort of $3,000 mitigation, which is about what it often is. And they need something other than just a Manitoba Hydro loan at 6.5% or so. What's the minister's plans in that respect?
The Honorable Minister for Environment, Climate, and Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the member from River Heights for following up on that question. I know we had a brief discussion in the House a while back, and we shared stories. I shared the story that I had actually gone out and bought a radon kit because I live in the Inner Lake, and there were concerns of soil type potentially having radon gas. Unfortunately, it came back negative. So certainly it gives you a little bit of comfort knowing the effects of radon gas. And really what we've done is, and what I continue to do is, again, work with public health on this issue. It is a public health issue. However, we need to continue to have those conversations on how best we could look at supporting, potentially a program or something going forward for less fortunate Manitoba families to ensure that, Manitobans are protected. Safety's, as you know, the member from River Heights knows, safety is one of our number one priorities, if not our number one priority. So we'll continue to have those conversations with health as we go forward to see if there's a whole of government approach on how we can work a fit for what the member is asking. So I appreciate the question.
The Honorable Member for River Heights.
My next question, and probably going to be my last one, I need you to wrap up your answer by 4:55, has to do with the most significant environmental pollutant for children, which is lead. And I know there was a second intrinsic report, and that report talked about, among other things, doing screening of children to look at lead levels. But I wonder if the minister has a follow-up and a response to the second intrinsic report.
The Honorable Minister of Environment, Climate, and Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the member from River Heights for the question. I'm just going to, again, just do a little bit of a catch-up here on the good work our government has been doing with respect to lead. Again, the province completed extensive lead soil testing in 40 Winnipeg neighborhoods. Over 2,000 samples were taken from 43 schools and 147 parks. 94.1% of results were below guidelines. Additional testing in Winnipeg, in the city of Winnipeg, helps us determine where increased lead concentration may still be present in the soil and provide the province and site owners with evidence-based actions that can be taken to reduce the risk and exposure. And Manitoba Health has developed new educational material for the public on sources of lead and how to mitigate exposure. And again, to the question on the outcome of the last eccentric report, effective May 1st, 2022, elevated blood lead levels will be reportable to Manitoba Health on an interim basis to help identify significant sources of lead exposure and determine next steps to address them. And again, the independent report and new educational material developed by the province to help identify and prevent exposure to all sources that are lead, and again, they're available at the website. So good work has been done on the second part of that follow-up. We continue to ensure that Manitobans, children particularly, are safe, and we'll continue to do that on a go-forward basis.
The Honorable Member for River Heights.
Thank you. Those are my questions. I pass it back to the MLA for Wolseley.
The member for Wolseley.
I think we're ready to ask the question.
The hour being,
You don't need to say it anymore. Just no. Just for this.
okay.
You don't need it. Because he left them.
Hearing no further questions, we will now proceed to consideration of the resolutions. Resolution 12.2, resolved that there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $31,426,000 for environment, climate, and parks and trails for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023. Shall the resolution pass? The resolution is accordingly passed. Resolution 12.3, resolved there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $20,726,000 for environment, climate, and parks, environmental stewardship for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023. Shall the resolution pass? The resolution is accordingly passed. Resolution 12.4, resolved that there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $3,270,000 for environment, climate, and parks, climate and green plan implementation office for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023. Shall the resolution pass? The resolution is accordingly passed. Resolution 12.5, resolved that there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $17,754,000 for environment, climate, and parks, water stewardship for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023. Shall the resolution pass? The resolution is accordingly passed. Resolution 12.6, resolved that there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $2,672,000 for environment, climate, and parks, capital assets for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023. Shall the resolution pass? The resolution is accordingly passed. The last item to be considered for these estimates is item 1 bracket A, the minister's salary contained in Resolution 12.1. The floor is now open for questions. The member for Wolseley.
Do I just read this? I move that line item 12.1A be amended so that the Minister of Environment, Climate, and Parks salary be reduced to $21,000.
It has been moved by the honorable member for Wolseley that line item 12.1 brackets A be amended so the Minister of Environment, Climate, and Parks salary be reduced to $21,000. The motion is in order. Are there any questions or comments on the motion? Is the committee ready for the question? Shall the motion pass? No. I hear a no. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed to the motion, please say nay. Nay. In my opinion, the nays have it. Now I'm going to go back to this one. Resolution 12.1. Resolved that there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $9,225,000 for environment, climate, and parks, finance, and shared services for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023. Shall the resolution pass? Yes. The resolution is accordingly passed. This completes the estimates for the Department of Environment, Climate, and Parks. Is it the will of the committee to call it 5 o'clock? The hour being 5 p.m., committee rise.